You must have created servers with Node.js, PHP, and Python. But let me tell you, you haven't got the taste of creating servers yet. So in this video, we're going to create a web server using C++. I'm using Windows and I have this project opened up in Visual Studio. And this is just a hello world code. The first thing that we need to do is to declare some variables and include some important libraries we need. As I'm using Windows, we need to include WinSock2 API. This is going to help us to create sockets that we need to create web servers. Now we can start declaring some variables. The first two will hold our socket information. I will explain the next one later. And then we have W as a data variable. Then we also need another variable to hold our server information. We need another variable to hold our server side. And then this variable called buffer side, I will explain this later as well. So in Windows, the first thing that we need to do is to call the WSStarter function. This initiates the use of WinSock by a process. This is the first thing that requires to be called. So the first parameter is W version required, and we can pass the version 2.2 for this project. Alright, so we can start by putting this inside an if statement, so we can also check for errors. If this doesn't return 0, then we need to understand that something is wrong. And you can also find this inside the documentation. But if successful, WSStarter function returns 0. Once we have initialized all the necessary things, we can start creating a socket. For web servers or HTTP web servers, we need to create a TCP socket. So the first parameter is an integer that takes address family. We want our server to be IPv4 or Internet Protocol version 4, and then next integer is type, and we want it to be a substring which uses TCP and AFINet. For protocol integer, we want it to use protocol version 4 and TCP. Checking for errors. If there is an error, it will return invalid socket. So we can just check for it. Let's run this thing so you can understand if there are any mistakes. There are no error messages, that means we are good to go. Now we need to bind our socket to a specific address. So we will define some parameters for our server information. Currently we will run this on localhost, so the IP should be 127.0.1.1, and our port for now I have chosen 8080. And finally set the server side. And now we can use the bind function to bind our socket to this address. Once again, we'll check for errors, and you can find this information in the documentation. Next, we need to start listening to our address. And for this, we need to use our listen function. The next parameter indicates number of connections you can handle with this socket. Again, we will check for errors. If we are able to do all those things, that means our socket has started listening and our server is working. Now we'll create a continuous loop to keep receiving information from our client requests. We'll use the accept function so we can accept data from our client request. And that's why we are using this new WSocket variable, because accept function returns a socket. However, we'll eventually close this socket after we have processed client request because we won't need it anymore. You can find more information in the documentation. Once we have accepted client request, we can read the request data. But I'll avoid this for now because you can actually do lots of processing and sanity checks on the information that client sends, so that's also a matter of security. But I'll show you how you can receive the data and process it. So we need to declare another variable called the bytes, so we'll save here how many bytes we are receiving each time. Please note that the name of functions will vary from OS to OS, so you need to use your own OS-based functions. And buffer size variable basically indicates the size of this new variable we have declared here. It should be big enough so we can hold our client request. If bytes is less than 0, that means we basically could not receive any client data, so that's an error. Alright, so now we can send a response back to our client, and this is a demo response that I have prepared. Make sure to copy this thing. You can edit the HTML text, but you can't edit the format, or this will throw an error. Our socket can't send the whole response at once, so we need to send this packet by packet. That's why we're going to create these two new variables to track how many bytes we have sent. Once again, we'll create a loop, and then we'll use the send function from Windows. If no bytes are sent, that means something was wrong, so you can give some output regarding that. If not, then we can increase total bytes sent by bytes sent. Finally, at the end, we should be able to send a response back to our client. Make sure to close our sockets and call the cleanup function. Now let's try running this thing and see if this works. Okay, so opening this thing in the browser gives some errors, so yeah, we must have some errors. So the first mistake was here. We need to change the variable, or basically keeping the same thing in a loop, and this line was a little bit mistaken. And now finally, if you run this on your browser, you should get nice hello world. That means you first created a server by itself using C++. Now you should have the power to build the big next server framework. Make sure to subscribe. So yeah.